Some of my viewers have been asking for more fictional stories, and while I may have evolved to show you some more real content, there are still a lot of great content creators out there who bring you stories from around the web. One of them being Animated Horror Stories, who not only narrates the horror stories, but he brings you an animation to add to some visual creepiness. So, if you're in the mood for some fiction, go check him out. His link's in the description. A few years back, I covered the town of Centralia, Pennsylvania. You know it's one of my favorite stories. There's something so interesting to me about a mistake that caused a town to become unlivable and forced people to leave. With Centralia, it was a never-burning fire underneath the town. But what if the danger was in plain sight? Let's take a look at what happened to Picher, Oklahoma. Take a trip back with me to 1918, when mining was expanding and the discovery of some valuable materials could pop up a town overnight and attract families to start a life there. The town of Picher, Oklahoma was created using just this method, appropriately named after the Picher Lead Company, built on an Indian reservation that once belonged to the Quapaw tribe. After the end of World War I, American demand for lead was high, so when the company discovered that the town was rich with lead and zinc, they got to work extracting the material rather quickly. The reason for the demand had to do with ammunition being made from the materials. American bombshells and bullets used in World War I and II largely came from the area. Specifically, half of it came from Picher, Oklahoma. At its height in the 1920s, its population soared to 19,000 and it was producing 10 million pounds of ore per day. Now, when miners extracted the lead and zinc, it had to be separated from the limestone and dolomite stone that surrounded it. The discard combination was called chat, and without a way to get rid of it, it quickly piled up around town, becoming a poorly planned mess. Hills grew to 300 feet high in some spots, and by the 1960s, when mining ceased, there were 30 piles all over town, producing 178 million tons of chat. The mining company, of course, just up and left, letting the town deal with their industrial abuse. The people in town made the best of their chat mountains. It was just something they had to live with, so they might as well make use of the sandy substance, right? The local high school track team trained on the mountains, and parents used it to fill in their children's sandboxes, repair their driveway, and used it for foundation. The local creek had been weirdly tinted orange over the last few decades, and people who swam in it thought it was strange that their hair also turned orange. What they thought were sunburns were actually chemical burns, because as they would soon discover, they were living in a toxic dump. When left exposed to the environment, chat is actually very hazardous. Particles of lead got into the soil, water, and drifted in the air. Other problems that plagued the town included large sinkholes that started forming, some underneath houses, due to the collapsing mine shafts. Speaking of the abandoned mine shafts, they became filled with groundwater and turned acidic with a combination of substance called cadmium and arsenic. This acidic water leaked into the creek that people were drinking from and the pond that people were swimming in. That is why it was orange. Chat still wasn't identified as a problem by the 1980s, even when Picher became a Superfund site. They all thought it was just the water that was causing the problems, and not the piles of toxic sand that were still sitting around town. But people were still getting sick. Test results showed that 63% of the students in town had an elevated level of lead in their bloodstream, and once lead enters the bloodstream, it doesn't leave. It can cause permanent brain damage and neurological damage. It wasn't until the mid-1990s when the EPA made their first measures to remove chat from the town. Crews came in to remove 6 to 10 inches of soil from people's yards, which cost $140 million to achieve, but it wasn't the solution. It was barely scratching, literally, the surface of the problem. By 2005, the government deemed Picher officially unlivable and started buying up property at $55 per square foot. They determined that 86% of the homes were dangerously undermined and could collapse into the ground at any moment. By now, tests had confirmed that the disease rate in Picher was 20 to 30% higher than anywhere else, and specifically lung disease, was 2,000 times higher than anywhere else. Like every abandoned town story, there were those few who wanted to hold on to the place that they grew up in and cherished, no matter how hazardous it was to live there. With Centralia, it was possible for people to stay until the very end, but Picher is a special kind of cursed. In May of 2008, a massive tornado tore through the center of the town, destroying many homes and forcing the remaining civilians to evacuate. By 2013, the EPA had spent $301 million on cleanup, and projected to spend another $178 million to dig out the wells and treat the water. They predict the project will take another 30 years to complete. Once the buyout was complete in 2001, the government sold the land back to the Quapaw tribe, who wanted to assist in the cleanup. How about that? We take your land, ruin it, and then sell it back to you so you can clean it up. That tribe sounds like a bunch of saints, and I really feel for them. Today, Picher is the picture of the apocalypse, with buildings damaged, boarded up, and covered in a layer of lead dust. The few animals that roam around town are also in danger because the water and air is still very contaminated. In fact, in 2015, 2,000 migratory birds were found dead in the streets. Some people think that Picher is slowly fading into obscurity. I think it's very important to keep reminding people of what happened here, to teach others of what happened here, and perhaps we won't be destined to repeat these mistakes. Picher will one day be cleaned up, but how many more towns do we have to destroy in the process? Thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing for more oddities, true crime, and bad horror movie reviews. Game with me on Twitch, follow me on Twitter, and as always, be well.